So back to your goals. Are your goals attainable? What kind of goals do you have? Is it physical health, mental health? Is it financial, career? Like, for example, since majority of you listeners are nurses, think about where you are in nursing profession. Are you a new grad? Did you just start orientation? Are you maybe a year into orientation? How are you feeling currently in your nursing career path? Are you already 5 years in, 6 years in, 15 years in, 20 years in? It doesn't matter the timeline or time frame. It's just, how do you feel about where you are right now? For new grads, you're probably still feeling a little bit stressed. Every shift probably stresses you out a little bit, gives you a little bit of anxiety, because even in that first year and a half, even 2 years, I felt that anxiety and stress walking onto every single shift, because you still don't really know all the possibilities that can happen to you in a given shift. Nursing is very scenario based, and there's almost a unlimited amount of scenarios that can happen. Good day goes to bad real quick. A bad shift goes to a good shift as well real quick. So that's always interesting to look at, because everyone is at a different playing field. You're at a different part of your career, you spend different amount of times being a nurse. So this might vary, but if you've been a nurse for a couple of years, are you comfortable where you are? Is this something that you see yourself doing for the next 10 years, for the rest of your life? And that's completely okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Lots of times, nursing is a female-dominant profession, so a lot of times nurses get their bachelor's, they become a nurse, and then that's where they stay, which is good, because then they turn into moms, they have kids, they get married, they have relationships, and they kind of grow in that sense versus just focusing on nursing. Nursing just becomes a thing that helps the finances, that pays the bills, and you're more oriented on family, on your relationship, on things like that, where nursing is kind of on the back burner because you're just doing that as a means of income. So some of you out there might be in a little different timeline, or a little bit different path. As I feel I get older, I feel like I'm running into more nurses that are trying to pursue higher education, or they're trying to move up higher in the workforce and you could say the nursing ladder. A lot of times they want to become charge nurses, or you might be a little bit over the whole bedside care, but still like nursing as a whole. You still like helping your peers, you still like helping patients, you still like the basic framework of what nursing is, but maybe you're feeling that, hey, I wish I could do a little bit more or a little bit less bedside. So charger position is always good for that. I know that maybe charger position doesn't pay a whole lot more than just a regular staff nurse, but still, if that's something that you kind of prefer, more of like you could say paperwork things, more of like the less hands-on approach and more of a reference and a resource, that's always a good thing to do, and it's always a good thing to have as a fellow staff nurse. It's always good to see that some nurses want to strive for that charge position, because they fill that role very well, because they know themselves a lot and they know what they like, and they're figuring out a way to do more oftentimes than not the things they like, administrative stuff, and that's great. Not so much for me, but to each their own. Some people might be thinking about maybe becoming a educator, or just maybe a manager, or things like that, and that's great. That's going to most likely oftentimes require you to go back to school. So if school is something you're thinking about for those administrative roles, you should definitely do it. There's been a handful of nurses that I met that got their masters, and they moved on to, for example, like one of the nurses that I used to work with, he got his master's, and then he started to work for like Epic, and he's like an Epic nurse or whatever that they do, and he goes around basically educating people on how to use Epic or whatever charging system that they work for. So that's always a good route if you're still interested in, you could say, the broader aspect of nursing, but not so much like the patient relationship thing things like that. Those are all always cool. A lot of people are going to sales. Lots of nurses that I met, or you can say lots of ex-nurses go into device sales or pharmaceutical sales. There's been a handful of times where a representative from Medtronic came and he used to be a nurse, or Hillram, the bad people came and they're ex-nurses. So that's another way to expand your nursing. Nothing wrong with that. It's just like you want to pursue a different career path, Same way when we were in, you could say, high school, we maybe worked at Starbucks, and that was cool for a little bit, but then you moved on to something else, so on and so forth. And I also want to address all those advanced degrees, like getting your master's and becoming a nurse practitioner. That's always a good thing if you want more of a, you could say, leadership role. Nurse management also leadership role, but like a nurse practitioner leadership role is a little bit different. It's more still clinical versus more of the administrative stuff. And I feel like I'm seeing more and more nurses try to attain for those degrees. Maybe because I'm older now. Because when I was a new grad, on my first couple of years, not a lot of people were going to get those degrees, like an NP degree or CRNA. Not that there was a lot. It's just personally in my circle, I didn't work with a lot. But that could also be to the fact that, hey, I was still a new nurse and didn't really associate myself with people that had been nurses for 5, 6, 7 years. Because if you're a new grad, you're most likely hanging out with the nurses that have been there roughly around the same time as you, so maybe a year or two. And when you graduate school, lots of times we want to take a break from school. You just got your bachelor's. A lot of times you don't want to pursue a master's right away. We want to get some experience. We just want to see how this feels, kind of see where the cards fall, play it out a little bit. So a lot of times I feel like newer nurses associate themselves and communicate with also newer nurses. So that's probably the bias that I had, because lots of times I hung out with just nurses that were maybe had a year or two of experience and they didn't want to pursue school yet. But now, as I'm 29 years old right now, a lot of people that are my age, I feel like now are going to school. So that's kind of like a little bit of that, of like that gap and that differentiation that kind of happens. And there's really no wrong choice to nursing. If you want to stay bedside, completely cool, nothing wrong with that. If you want to do a more administrative route, super cool. Definitely follow your goals. If you want to do more of a leadership, hands-on clinical approach, that's amazing too. There's really no place to go wrong in nursing. And of course, if you're a new grad and you're thinking about this, like, hey, all these nurses have goals, I'm kind of just here trying to figure things out, that's perfect. That's exactly where you should be. You got to figure out where you are right now. You have to first be comfortable with being a nurse and being comfortable with going to work and expecting the unexpected. Because when you get used to that, it kind of feels like everything just kind of falls in place. So just to summarize, whatever nursing goals you have, if it's to get comfortable with just being a staff nurse and being comfortable with coming into work, that's a really good thing to focus on for the next couple months, if not the rest of the year. If you want to think about going back to school, give you props, do it. But remember, especially if you haven't been in school for the last 5, 6 years, there is a lot of background work that you have to do. You have to figure out how much tuition is going to be. You got to figure out what school you're going to go to, what are you going to pursue. If you're doing NP, are you doing like a family NP? Are you thinking about doing like a psych NP? Or maybe you're just want to get just a basic, not basic, but maybe you just want to get a master's and just go into more of a administrative position. Do you want to level up on the unit? Do you want to be a clinical educator? Do you want to eventually be a manager? Do you want to be a charge nurse? Those are all good things to pursue. And maybe if those aren't goals that you really want to dive in 100% right now, but are considering, it's always good to just think about the steps that you could take to kind of get there. If you're thinking about maybe becoming the unit educator, good idea to always ask your manager or the current educator, like, hey, what did you have to do to kind of get yourself in this situation? What do I have to take? What classes do I need? Where do I got to work? What are responsibilities? What are requirements? Because lots of times we go into these things and we have an idea of, let's just say, hey, I want to be a nursing educator, right? But we don't really know the day-to-day of a nursing educator, right? We just know, we just know what we see. We know they walk around, help nurses with education, things like that, but you don't know the full background up to it. So if this is kind of in the back of your mind, it's always good to ask, like, hey, as a nursing educator, what do you do all day? Like, what are your responsibilities? And they'll share with you a lot more things, because maybe you like the education portion, but you just don't like the whole administrative side to that education portion, where you have to kind of follow up on, hey, are we meeting these outcomes? Are we doing this? Why are we not hitting these outcomes? Things like that, because your responsibility is going to be to not only your nursing peers, but also higher management as to, hey, you're supposed to be doing this. Why has this not been met? So there's a lot of things that go on in the background that we don't know in careers or paths they want to pursue. Same with like nursing. When you went to nursing school, you had this idea of what nursing is, and now you've been a nurse for a while, or you're a new grad, and you're like, oh, so this is how nursing actually is. This is not the whole scope of what I thought I was getting myself into. So there's always things like that.